Al-Jihad, a case study in terrorism by Colin Haney. Next slide. Al-Jihad grew out of a merger of two Islamic idealist groups in Egypt in the late 1970s. The first group was located in Upper Egypt, led by extremist Karam Zudi. The second branch was a revolutionary group based out of Cairo under the control of Muhammad Abd al-Salam Faraj. Faraj was a skilled speaker, and he coined the term near enemy to describe the Egyptian government. He wished to focus on the Egyptian government before he would move on to other Islamic states. Next slide. In 1980, Faraj wrote The Neglected Duty, a book outlining the standards by which Al-Jihad would form and operate. With that, Al-Jihad was formed as a small underground group based out of Cairo, Egypt. They began to absorb smaller extremist groups into their ranks. Faraj, however, was an intellectual. In early 1980, Egyptian Army Colonel Abdu al-Zumar was recruited to lend his military expertise to the training of Al-Jihad members. He would go on to become the second in command. Next slide. On September 2, 1981, Egyptian President Anwar Sadat ordered the arrest of 1,530 Islamic radical militants. The crackdown, along with allegations of corruption in Sadat's regime and the signing of the Sinai Treaty with Israel, enraged extremist Islamists enough to take action. At a national parade, Al-Jihad killed Sadat, the Cuban ambassador, an Omani general, and a Coptic Orthodox bishop. 28 others were wounded, including Vice President Hosni Mubarak, Irish Defense Minister James Tully, and 4 U.S. military liaison officers. Media attention on Al-Jihad was high. Sadat's funeral was largely ignored by the Islamic community, and with only one Muslim head of state attending. Al-Jihad, however, now had the attention of the Egyptian government as well as the entire globe. Next slide. Roughly 300 extremists were imprisoned for Sadat's assassination, including Ayman al-Zawahiri. While in prison, Al-Jihad took on the name Egyptian Islamic Jihad, and Abd al-Zumar took control with al-Zawahiri a close second in command. After just 3 years in prison, most members of the EIG, including al-Zawahiri, were released. Al-Zumar was serving a life sentence for smuggling weapons into Egypt. Most of the EIG fled to Pakistan and Afghanistan upon release to avoid persecution in Egypt. Next slide. With the jihadist exodus from Egypt in the early 1980s, the city of Peshawar, Pakistan became a new base of operations. Peshawar became an operational training center, and al-Sharif stepped up to take control. Al-Zumar could not function as a leader of jihad while serving his life sentence in prison. Dr. Fadal took over, and al-Zawahiri was his second in command. Next slide. It was during this time in the early to mid-80s that al-Sharif and al-Zawahiri worked tirelessly to rebuild the Egyptian Islamic Jihad. With many members imprisoned or displaced, it was not an easy task. The EIG also began to create ties with Osama bin Laden. Bin Laden was a known fundraiser for the jihad in Afghanistan. He was wealthy and would prove a valuable asset to the EIG's cause. We will see that bin Laden's relationship with the EIG, and specifically al-Zawahiri, was long-standing and deadly. Bin Laden's resources and connections would prove invaluable in the continuance of the EIG's efforts. Next slide. While in Peshawar, Dr. Fadal spent time teaching jihadists the proper way to fight battles. Fadal believed the ultimate goal was not to defeat the enemy, but to earn salvation through martyrdom. In 1988, Fadal released one of the most important works in the jihadist training, The Essential Guide for Preparation. The Essential Guide for Preparation outlined how the true believer in Islam will receive many rewards in heaven, how the ultimate prize goes to the martyr. The text is, for obvious reasons, very dangerous in the wrong hands, and it was illegal to even possess the book in Egypt. Next slide. With their partnership with bin Laden in Afghanistan, the EIG was able to bolster its ranks quickly. There they trained members in mujahideen camps, especially in the ways of suicide bombing. The EIG, along with bin Laden, relocated to the Sudan around the same time al-Sharif completed his work, The Compendium of the Pursuit of Divine Knowledge. The second work was similar to his first book, and took an even more absolute stance, asserting, "A man may enter the faith in many ways, yet be expelled from it by just one deed." Next slide. In 1990, the differences between al-Zawahiri and al-Sharif became troublesome. The two hotly debated strategies for making a difference in the Egyptian government. Al-Zawahiri favored a merger with an Islamic group in the midst of a terror campaign against the Egyptian government and tourists to Egypt. Al-Sharif felt that such attacks were futile and would not benefit the EIG or Islam. He instead favored a slower infiltration of the Egyptian government. In 1991, following widespread discontent with Sharif's leadership, members of the EIG demanded he step down. Al-Sharif willingly gave up his post. Zawahiri was now in complete control of the EIG, and it became a free-floating network without any real ties to its original society or the surrounding society. Next slide. Under al-Zawahiri's direction, the EIG attempted to kill the Egyptian Interior Minister, Hassan al-Alfi, in mid-1993. Al-Alfi was leading the Egyptian resistance to Islamic militants, making him a prime target for the EIG. They used a motorcycle strapped with explosives detonating near the car the minister was traveling in. The blast killed 2, but the minister was only injured. In November 1993, the EIG struck again with another suicide bombing. This time the target was Egyptian Prime Minister Atef Sidqui. The explosion missed its target and instead injured 21 civilians and killed a young girl attending a nearby school. The public was outraged by this, and the resulting government crackdown was harsh. A strong policy shift by the Egyptian government in response to public outcry resulted in the arrest of 280 and execution of 6 members of the EIG. Next slide. The failures continued in 1995 with the failed assassination attempt of Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak. With the help of the Sudanese government, the EIG spent more than a year planning the attack in Ethiopia, where Mubarak would be attending a conference of the Organization of African Unity. They wished to create a vacuum in the Egyptian government by which Islamic loyalists could fill. The trend of failed assassinations followed by government crackdowns continued with a Mubarak-led campaign against anyone involved in Muslim terrorism. The attempt failed yet again. Because of Sudanese involvement in the plot, the United States placed sanctions on the country. Al-Zawahiri, bin Laden, and the entire EIG then left Sudan at the request of the government and returned to Afghanistan. Next slide. On November 19, 1995, Zawahiri led his first successful attack and the EIG's deadliest to date. His target of choice was the Egyptian embassy in Pakistan. According to Zawahiri, he would have attacked the American embassy as well, but funds were not enough. In total, the 2 bombers, the second secretary for the embassy, 3 Egyptian security guards, and 12 others, including civilians, and as many as 4 other diplomats were killed, and approximately 60 were wounded. In his 1998 writing, International Islamic Front for Jihad Against Jews and Crusaders, Zawahiri called for the killing of all Americans, including civilians. The shift in focus away from the Egyptian government angered many EIG members who wished to continue their focus on Egypt. The dissent and resulting turmoil was enough to push away many members. Among those who left was Zawahiri's own brother and military commander Muhammad al-Zawahiri. By the early 2000s, EIG membership was at an all-time low, with approximately 40 members total and 0 in Egypt. In an attempt to keep the jihadist movement alive, Zawahiri further strengthened ties with Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan. The EIG merged with Al-Qaeda, and 6 of the 9 members of Al-Qaeda's ruling council were originally EIG members. Zawahiri would go on to become bin Laden's second in command, and he's been described as the real brains of the operation.